Mike Brown, the former FEMA director.
Joining us here is the former FEMA director.
History, I think, was very unkind to you, my friend. Very unkind.
Mr. Brown, thanks for being with us.
This is Michael Brown Unplugged.
Welcome to today's edition of Michael Brown Unplugged. Glad to have you with me. Let's get started because I got a lot to talk about today. So Austria has issued these 10 commandments for migrants. Now, I know that immigration is a huge issue among European countries. It's a huge issue, obviously, in the United States because of the migrant caravans that are coming across the southern border. Almost everywhere you look, immigration is a serious issue. Well, the new code of conduct in Austria urges refugees to respect Austrian law and to refrain from violence. Now, I want you to stop and think about that for a minute. It is still the law in the United States that if you want to legally immigrate to this country, that you need to understand the Constitution, you need to understand the language, you need to be able to speak and write the language. I think with the exception of HIV or AIDS, you cannot have any communicable diseases. But nonetheless, we've just kind of ignored all of that stuff. And so just anybody that wants to come into the country can come in the country, and we just don't really seem to care about that. Well, the state government of Lower Austria has a proposal in front of them called the 10 Commandments of Immigration. These 10 commandments specify the rules of conduct for migrants seeking asylum in the country, including refraining from violence and showing gratitude to the host country. Now, those are my words. Those are not necessarily the specific words of the 10 commandments. But think about how far we have fallen when just in the discussion of immigration, we have to say that, look, if you're going to come into our country, either as an asylum seeker or as a legal immigrant or even as an illegal immigrant, we would like for you to refrain from violence. We really have to ask people to do that? Germany state-run DW News reported the details of the proposed code for asylum seekers. Here's what the newspaper reported. Authorities in Lower Austria are set to issue a new code of conduct for refugees to follow, according to a report on Monday. The rules would be referred to as the 10 Commandments of Immigration and would be issued to new refugees as soon as they arrive in the state, according to the German newspaper Welt. Among the rules, migrants are required to. Now listen to these rules. And I know there are a lot of people who will say that this is some sort of, you can couch it in any terms you want to. Nationalism, alt-right, some sort of right-wing extremism. Set that aside for a moment and just ask yourself that if you wanted to move to France, you wanted to move to Brazil's on my mind because I've got a story about Brazil I'm going to get to today. If you wanted to move to any of those countries, isn't there some expectation that you will be a good citizen? Particularly if you wanted to immigrate and become a citizen of that country. I'm not talking about, even as a tourist. Even if you're going to France, you're going to Austria, you're going to Croatia, you're going to Brazil, you're going to Ecuador, you're going to China, wherever you happen to go as a tourist, isn't there some expectation that, one, you will comply with the local laws, you won't commit acts of violence, and you will be, in the sense of being a good citizen, you will be a good tourist? Well, here are the rules that Lower Austria is set to issue to people coming into the country. Learn German. If you're going to be a citizen, you ought to be expected to at least, maybe you can't speak, as many immigrants to this country couldn't speak English when they arrived at Ellis Island. Nonetheless, there was this expectation, not even an expectation so much on the part of current U.S. citizens, but there was an expectation of the immigrants as they moved here that they wanted to learn the language. I am appalled at how far we have fallen, not only from our own expectations, but the expectations of people that move here. Look, if you move here from, I don't care, if you move here from one of the S-hole countries, you move here from Germany, you move here from Brazil, you move here from, I don't care where. I don't want you to give up your native language, but I do think it's reasonable that if you're going to become a citizen of another country, that you at least start the process and that you would want to learn the language of that country. I've often thought that it would be fun as I get older, and you read all these stories. I had a phone call with a friend last night who is determined to retire in a country other than the United States. Now, he speaks fluent Spanish, so he'll be fine because he kind of wants to go to Ecuador or Colombia or some Spanish-speaking country. But as I've gotten older, I've thought, yeah, wouldn't it be fun to retire to a foreign country, even if only you did it for a couple of years, just to have that experience while you're still alive of not just visiting. I mean, I've visited countries all over the world, S-hole countries and third world countries and first world countries, and I've had the privilege of visiting all those countries. But I've often thought it would be fun to move to one of those countries and live and work there for a year or two. I would have this personal obligation that if I'm going to live in X country, that I would start learning that language, because I've always wanted to speak a second language, and what better way to do it? But shouldn't there be an expectation on both parties, on both ends, of those who live here now as an English-speaking country? Shouldn't we have an expectation of people who want to emigrate to this country and who want to become U.S. citizens, that they would want to and that they should learn to speak English, even if they can't on the first day? And shouldn't it be the expectation of those who want to become U.S. citizens, just as those who moved here from all of those countries in Western and Eastern Europe, they wanted to learn the language? This shows how progressivism works, and this shows how the mores and the standards, they do evolve, and most of the time they evolve in a good way. But now political correctness has gotten in the way, and no, this idea of multiculturalism is a bunch of doohickey. It's a bunch of BS. And if you're going to, other than be a tourist, if you're going to live in a country, you really ought to become a part of that country. But anyway, back to the rules. I know I digress. Among the rules, migrants are required to learn German, adhere to Austrian laws, adopt Austrian values and raise children in accordance with them, resolve conflicts nonviolently, respect religious freedom, prevent unnecessary suffering to animals, show gratitude to Austria. The story says the rules would underpin integration courses in 15 different languages for individuals applying for asylum. Refugees would be asked to sign a written agreement to adhere to them. Officials would issue the commandments to refugees alongside their official asylum application documents, the regional minister responsible for asylum policy was reported as saying. Now, why is this happening? The move comes amid a growing migrant crisis in Austria. This really applies to almost any country in Europe, but the Austrians are pushing back. The 2018 annual crime report issued by the Interior Ministry showed that foreign nationals committed almost 40% of all crimes in Austria. The police booked 105,812 foreigners for various crimes in 2017, and that is a 100% rise compared to 10 years ago. Afghan suspects topped the migrant crime list, according to this report. Now, just like the Chancellor, Sebastian Kurz-led government in Vienna, a coalition made up of the conservative Austrian People's Party and the right-wing FPO rules the state of Lower Austria. So Chancellor Kurtz's government has come under repeated attacks from the mainstream media for its harsh immigration policy, including cutbacks on welfare payments that are going to migrants. The story is reported in one news article, in one television article, one television story.
Austria's right-wing coalition government is cracking down on benefits paid to foreigners in a bid to deter asylum seekers. The government plans to cap refugees' main benefit payment at €563 a month, rising to the €863 available to Austrian citizens if they pass a language test. The fundamental rule we'll introduce is that German will become the key to accessing the full minimum benefit. That means that whoever has insufficient language skills will not be able to claim the full minimum benefit. Migrants will also be barred from claiming such benefits for 5 years, a move that goes against EU rules that all member state citizens be treated equally. The Austrian People's Party won last year's parliamentary election with a hard line on immigration, pledging not to allow a repeat of the 2015 migration crisis.
Now, I don't want to go all into a dissection of that news report, but the use of the language like hardline stances on immigration seemed to me to be inflammatory language. Now, the elected officials belonging to the FPO in Austria brought forth this proposal. An FPO politician and the state's county commissioner, Gottfried Wadzel, said, "It is not forbidden to demand a little something in return for granting someone protection for a duration of time and give him everything he needs, namely a little bit of gratitude for Austria." Now, the leadership of this party has been speaking out against mass migration, particularly from Arab and Muslim majority countries. And so when you tie that in, because that's where the majority of the migrants are coming from, they just happen to be from Arab and Muslim majority countries. So if you then make these, what I consider to be reasonable demands of people who are seeking the protection of your country, that you will do these simple things, like learn to speak German, don't commit violence, respect freedom of religion, don't hurt animals, be a good citizen. Somehow that's seen as racist. That drives me bat crap crazy. And of course, as you can expect, the European mainstream media has lashed out against this move. An Austrian province asking migrants to follow the law and respect social norms has, holy cow, quote, caused a stir, according to a German state broadcaster. The commandment number 10, telling migrants to live in gratitude to Austria, has generated the most controversy. Really? I live in gratitude to this country every single day. I'm a citizen. And I try to show my gratitude. I pay my taxes. I'll bitch about them, but I pay my taxes. I engage with my government. I express my opinions. I exercise the rights that are given to me both by God and by natural law and that are enshrined in the Bill of Rights. I follow the rules. No, I speed occasionally. All of us are lawbreakers in one way or another. But I don't commit heinous crimes. And by being a good citizen, I'm showing gratitude to my country. And I don't know why it's so difficult, or more importantly, why it is so politically incorrect to ask people who are coming to your country. I'm talking about Austria, but the same applies to the United States, that if you're going to come here and you're going to use all of the great things that this country has to offer, shouldn't you show a little gratitude? Shouldn't you assimilate? And when I say assimilate, I don't necessarily mean that you have to give up or that you have to disavow the culture that you come from. But you have to recognize that the culture of the place that you came from is different than the culture that you're now involved in the United States. I mean, the culture, let's take let's take Great Britain, the United Kingdom. English culture is different from American culture, even though we have so many things in common. American culture is different from French culture. French culture is different from German culture. German culture is different from Mexican culture. Italian culture is different from Canadian culture, and the list goes on and on and on. But here's what I want you to think about. Here's the perspective that I want you to consider. Is it outrageous, or is it just political correctness that says, yeah, we're going to bring migrants in, we're going to allow asylum seekers, we're going to have a process and a procedure for doing that, and if you're granted asylum, or if you want to immigrate legally and just become a citizen of another country, I don't care which country it is, that there are some things that are required of you to do that because you're not a natural-born citizen of that country. You're wanting to become a citizen of that country. But this is the world that we now live in. We live in a world where just simply asking you to almost do, these are the kinds of things your mother would ask you to do, right? This is what your mom would ask you to do. This is what your parents would expect of you if you went to visit somebody else's home. Why can't we do that with people that want to immigrate to our country? So I don't care what you call it in Austria. I don't care how you label it. To me, it just seems reasonable and it seems rational. So moving on. I saw this story a couple of days ago, and I kind of glanced through it, and then it kept popping up in all of my different news feeds. And when I say news feeds, I'm not talking about Facebook. I'm talking about the different websites that I go to, starting with the Drudge Report and the Wall Street Journal and Complete Colorado, all the news sites that I go to every morning to kind of get a perspective on what's going on in the world. Apparently, Harvard Law School professor Ron Sullivan has been removed as the dean of Winthrop House because he has committed the heresy of joining the defense team of Harvey Weinstein. And that has sent shockwaves through the legal academic community. I've got 1 degree of separation between me and Harvey Weinstein, and it has nothing to do with Harvey Weinstein's conduct. It has to do with the fact that a friend of mine is actually working on PR strategy for Harvey Weinstein and doing an excellent job of it. And he and I have had the conversation, just as anybody is entitled to this in this country, is entitled to a legal defense, why isn't Harvey Weinstein, scumbag that he is, why isn't he entitled to a legal defense team? Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz, that I refer to a lot, has sided with Professor Sullivan, and he made his opinion known in a column for Fox News. And the column is headlined, "McCarthyism Comes to Harvard. Why This Should Alarm All of Us." But rather than read some of what Professor Dershowitz wrote, I want you to hear what he said when he was on Laura Ingram's show. Now remember, what he is defending is he's defending the right of this professor to be a part of a legal defense team, something that all of us, regardless of our political position, should say, yeah, that scumbag murderer is entitled to a legal defense. We all accept that. That scumbag womanizer, that scumbag woman abuser is also entitled to a legal defense. The rapist, the murderer, the bank robber, the embezzler, anybody who commits these crimes, they're entitled to a legal defense. Why suddenly is that? And I'll tell you why. I think it's politically incorrect. But why all of a sudden would students at Harvard Law School be upset that one of their professors is defending Harvey Weinstein? Are they not learning anything at Harvard? Here's the professor.
Everybody has the right to a defense. When I was in college, professors and lawyers got fired for representing communists. Back in the bad old days, you could get fired for representing somebody who was gay or a woman who was seeking an abortion, or you can imagine other situations like that. And now, of course, you get fired, and he was fired from his job as dean for representing a controversial and unpopular somebody who has been charged with a rape. The students claim that they feel unsafe. It's a nonsensical argument. Feeling unsafe with a professor? This same professor represented a double murderer a couple of years ago. The same students didn't feel unsafe. This is political correctness run amok. These are students who don't care about due process, don't care about free speech. The only thing they care about is getting their way. They don't like the fact that he's representing somebody who they don't like. They claim he's been away too often. If he was away prosecuting Harvey Weinstein, they'd be building a statue to him. And
Amen. Amen. I sincerely believe, and you can call me a radical, you can say it's hyperbole, you can say it's outrageous, but I firmly believe this, that institutions of higher education and what is being taught, what is being allowed to occur, is really the front line in the cultural war, in the political war for the soul of this country. When you have students who, oh yeah, we think that, blah, 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 you ought to be able to go defend a murderer, but if you're going to defend Harvey Weinstein, we're going to run you out of town. And I use the phrase run you out of town because wait till you hear some more details. This law professor, Ron Sullivan, is being removed from his deanship at the school's Winthrop House. His wife, Stephanie Robinson, who is a lecturer in the law school as well, has also been cast aside. They have been run out of town. They have been told, don't let the sun set on you in Harvard. Why do I use that for those phrases and that language? Because Ron Sullivan Jr. and Stephanie Robinson, his wife, were the first black faculty deans in Harvard's history. The left is eating their own. I guess it is no longer. We might as well just admit that race is no longer a protected class. We might as well just admit, if you want to take the left's position and what progressives are doing to this country, that being African American, being black in this country no longer matters. Now, I've always thought that the color of your skin shouldn't matter. It should be the content of your character. And it appears to me, without knowing anything else about Ron Sullivan Jr. or Stephanie Robinson, what I do know is that they have risen to great heights, teaching at Harvard Law School, lecturing at Harvard Law School, being the dean at the Winthrop House, and now being run out of town for doing what those students at Harvard Law School should be taught, and that is that the worst of our society is guaranteed equal justice under the law. They are being punished simply for joining the legal team representing the disgraced Hollywood mogul Harvey Weinstein last year. And these social justice warriors on the Harvard campus think that means that Sullivan is somehow complicit in Weinstein's alleged crimes. You know, like everybody else in the world, these Harvard students think that Harvey Weinstein is a grotesque pig. Harvey Weinstein is a grotesque pig from what I know. But unlike everybody else, the students think that somehow that disqualifies him from due process under the law. I sometimes think, when I talk about the soul of the nation, whether it's immigration or it's stories like this, that what is happening is that in institutions of higher education, I would say to some degree in K through 12, and certainly in our politics and in the culture, and by the culture I mean in Hollywood, television, film, radio, whatever it might be, we're losing. Now, I think there's this great swath of Americans who get it, but don't have the time to fight it. So I'm going to renew a call that I always made on the radio program. You have a sphere of influence. Some of us have large spheres of influence, and some of us have medium, and some of us have small spheres of influence, but all of us have a sphere of influence. Friends, family, co-workers, neighbors, whomever. These are the kinds of issues that should be discussed over dinner. These are the kinds of issues that should be discussed over coffee. These are the kinds of issues that need to be brought to the forefront, because if we allow the progressives, if we allow the fascists, and I mean that in every sense of the word, those who want to shut down speech, those who want to shut down due process, those who want to implement some sort of authoritarian system in this country, they should be mocked, shunned, derided, and they should be called out at every opportunity. Because if we don't, if we just allow them to get their way, we lose, and we lose the country. Harvard is, I could probably find dozens and dozens of examples of this. But I love this example because think of the confluence of factors that you have. First and foremost, you have one of the most prestigious law schools in the country, Harvard, the elite of the elite, where you would think that everybody is learning about the Constitution, and they're learning about due process, and they're learning about, substantive and procedural due process and the differences between those two. And you would think that they would understand that what I said earlier, that, the least in our society are guaranteed the same protections by the Constitution as the most wealthy in this society, or the most famous, or the most influential. So you have that factor. Then you have the factor of taking a cultural pig icon in Harvey Weinstein, the genesis of the hashtag #MeToo movement, in which for a while everybody was clamoring on. Everybody was climbing on that bandwagon of Me Too. Think of the Kavanaugh hearings. Think of everybody that's been accused, justly or unjustly, of having committed some sort of sexual assault or sexual crime or just being a pig. Then you have, on top of that, these two professors are black, and they are literally being driven out of town. It's like we need to create some sort of, we're going back to a segregated society. If you do not fit the politically correct regimen that the social justice warriors are trying to impose upon this republic, then it doesn't make any difference whether you're rich or poor, black or white. Doesn't make any difference of your status in society. Doesn't make any difference about the size of your sphere of influence. If you don't meet their social justice warrior standards, you're a pariah. We're seeing the destruction of the Constitution, and we're seeing the destruction of the values that made this country what it is before our very eyes. We are living in the midst of a historical and a cultural revolution. I would add parenthetically, we just haven't gotten yet to the point, we're doing the ostracizing. We're running people out of town. We're just not yet back to lynchings or firing squads or just confining people to ghettos. And if that kind of description bothers you, you're not paying attention. So what are the top issues for Republican voters? They may not get it even if their representatives win elections, but I think Republican voters know exactly what they want. They want an end to the runaway immigration, both illegal and legal, that is transforming this country into a different country. So there's a Harvard-Harris poll. Too much Harvard today, right? There's a Harvard-Harris poll. Says building the wall and reducing overall immigration are the number one and number two issues for Republican voters. If you don't think there's a difference between the two parties, there was a time when, I would say, maybe before the election of Donald Trump. So in ancient history, 2015 backwards, back in the Dark Ages, you would never have, you always heard people talking about, well, there's not a dime's worth of difference between the two parties. They're both after the same thing. And in terms of elected officials, that may be true in how they conduct themselves. But when you think about what voters and the difference between voters are in the two parties, this poll is a great example. Ranking, again, this is a Harvard-Harris poll. Ranking is the top priority for Republicans, conservatives, and Trump supporters. 22 to 25% of these voters said building a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border should be the president's number one goal today. Reducing all immigration, both illegal and legal, to the U.S. is ranked as the second top priority for Republicans, conservatives, and Trump voters. Between 19 and 20% of these voters said reducing the inflow of immigrants should be Trump's second top priority. Now, unfortunately, this contrasts sharply with the last State of the Union speech, during which Trump horrified supporters by calling for immigration in the largest numbers ever, despite the glaringly obvious need to assimilate current immigrants before we start taking in any more. And this poll is not an outlier if you think it's an outlier. In a Reuters Ipsos poll last month, GOP voters called immigration the, quote, most important problem facing the nation. And a Harvard Institute of Politics poll found that young GOP voters were the most skeptical of immigration. Well, there's a little ray of hope. However, big but, Republican voters' support for reducing legal immigration levels, at which about 1.2 million legal immigrants are admitted to the United States every year, is a direct rejection of the big business interests and the GOP donor apparatus lobbying for more legal immigration. This is why nothing significant was done about building the wall or ditching suicidal immigration policies or asylum policies, even when the Republicans held both houses of Congress as well as the White House. Mass immigration suppresses wages, which is good for the people who pay the wages in the short term, unless they ignore the bigger picture and the socialists start winning. Then they better start getting concerned. Hang on. Sip a Diet Coke, and I'll be right back. You know, one of the things that doesn't get a lot of attention in the United States are elections in foreign countries. Of course, we usually pay attention to what happens in the United Kingdom with the election of a prime minister there. We pay attention to what happens in Israel with the election of a prime minister there. Sometimes Australia, sometimes Germany and Angela Merkel make the news. But otherwise, most other countries, when they have elections, we're not really paying attention. Now, certainly, obviously, CIA and the White House and other people are paying attention, and the media pays a little bit of attention to it, but doesn't really cover it. But one of the countries that recently held an election that has ramifications that we ought to be paying attention to, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to talk about Brazil. You know, I think the Democrats might want to actually rethink this strategy they have of everything being race-based in light of Brazilian president, and I may be pronouncing his name, and if I am, I'm not trying to bastardize it. I just don't know how to pronounce his name correctly. Jair Bolsonaro. Jair Bolsonaro. Now, when you think about Brazil demographically, it's really the kind of country that Democrats, particularly Democrats like Joe Biden, openly plan to make America into. They want to make America, they want to make the United States into a multiracial melange where whites are a minority. And demographically, we're on that way. I don't really care who the majority race is in America. I don't even really care who the majority ethnic group is in America. All I care are that Americans are Americans. But in Brazil, where whites are a minority, they really have taken multiculturalism to a different level. Now, granted, Brazil has elected its share of corrupt socialists, just as Democrats expect post-Caucasian America to do, which is why I emphasize I really don't care about the demographic makeup of America. For me to sit here and try to proclaim that I want America to be a predominantly white America, well, one, I think that would be racist. And in addition to that, it's not what I believe. What I want America to be, whether it is predominantly white, black, Asian, or regardless of the predominance of a particular ethnic group, what I want America to be is I want America to be America. That's not necessarily what the fundamental transformation of America is. The fundamental transformation of America, as it started with, going all the way back, if you want to go, you can go all the way back to Woodrow Wilson, and then, Franklin Roosevelt. Then you get to Lyndon Johnson, and then you get to Bill Clinton, who truly was more of a centrist, and then you get to Barack Obama, who proudly proclaimed that he wanted to fundamentally transform America. Now we have, and it's almost like it's like this exponential increase in the speed of our race toward oblivion. And in my opinion, oblivion is turning America into a socialist country. And the very fact that on my radio program and on the very fact that on this podcast that I'm decrying the attempt to turn America into a socialist nation really tells us that we've taken that off-ramp. We've taken the off-ramp and we've made a hard left turn, at least as far as the political leadership is concerned. So back to Brazil. So over the years, they have elected all of these, corrupt politicians. And the result, just as we have seen in, remember my list the other day of the dirtiest cities in America, and the top 15 or something were all Democrat-controlled over the past, 3 or 4 decades? Well, the same is true in Brazil. The election of socialist, corrupt progressives has resulted in dysfunction and poverty throughout Brazil. I don't know if you've ever been to Rio. I think most Americans, when they think of Rio, is the statue of Christ, or they think of the Ipanema beach. They think of the nude beaches. That's what I think most Americans think of when they think of Brazil or Rio. I've had the fortunate pleasure of spending a lot of time in Rio back in the 80s, and I can tell you, and I'm sure it hasn't changed, the poverty is absolutely mind-boggling. But something happened that really wasn't expected. People started getting sick of the socialists and the progressives and the corrupt politicians, and they pushed back against the liberal establishment, and they elected Jair Bolsonaro. They've elected they've elected a Trump light. Now, this story indicates how things are currently working out for the progressive agenda, at least in Brazil. And the lesson for us is, got to push back, and you got to push back hard. Brazil has some of the most restrictive gun laws in the world. While the country of over 200 million inhabitants at the same time also has one of the highest murder rates. Pause. Some of the most restrictive gun laws in the world, and yet has one of the highest murder rates in the world. So two concepts that Bolsonaro linked in his campaign for office last year: restrictive gun laws and high murder rates. So last week he kept his campaign promise, and he relaxed some controls on personal gun ownership and personal gun use adopted by past administrations. He said on a social media account, 12 million followers, "We are following a path totally opposed to authoritarianism, which always seeks to disarm the population. We are mainly attending the good citizen who follows the law and respects society." Brazilian gunmaker Taurus, stock jumped 21% on the news. But isn't it nice to hear someone say, particularly in these terms, that by following and having these restrictive gun controls, that we are following a path totally opposed to authoritarianism, which always seeks to disarm the population? We are mainly attending the good citizen who follows the laws and respects society. When you link restrictive gun laws and high murder rates and say, then we need to relax the rules on personal ownership of guns, that tells me you've got somebody that, hey, we should pay attention to. So speaking of beaches, social engineers might at some point have to choose between the good of the planet and other aspects of their new Green Deal agenda. South Africa seemed to be their ultimate triumph. South Africa at one time was a first world country that was turned over to the communists, only to be looted and destroyed, all in the name of equity and social justice. Now, this has turned out poorly not only for the people who produce South Africa's food, but it's actually turned out to be bad for Mother Earth. And I thought that the Green New Deal, and I thought all of these climate change advocates, the religion of climate change, oh my gosh, it is such a religion. Earlier, we have learned that South African rivers have become open sewers. Now, listen to this. The severe sewage discharge followed massive amounts of rubbish piling up on Durban streets after municipal workers went on an unprotected strike, protesting against salary hikes awarded to the MK veterans, the communist veterans. Envy. If you've ever watched Bill Whittle on YouTube, you know how he can so eloquently explain something. He boiled it down to just a few words. That's what leftist economics boils down to. You see, MK was the armed wing of the ruling African National Congress, co-founded by that liberal demagogue Nelson Mandela himself. So the story that I have says, it emerged last month on the eve of this week's election that some MK vets employed by the city had received pay increases between $9,000 and $20,000. Many were employed in Ethweki's already dysfunctional Durban Solid Waste Department. The strike, including blockades and dumping of refuse in the city center, took place amid Africa's biggest international tourism conference, the Tourism Indaba, taking place in Durban. Bathing, surfing, and fishing have been banned in Durban because of raw sewage flowing into the water. Hundreds of thousands of liters of raw sewage are flowing into the port every single hour. So I guess tourists, kind of like the fish, are advised to steer clear of this utopian rainbow, this utopian country. The story continues. The Queenie, I can't pronounce it, I'm sorry, municipality's health unit on Thursday ordered the city's Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Department to ban all bathing on Durban's beaches until further notice. Diving operations, essential to the port's ship repair precinct, as well as all fishing in the port of Durban, have also been suspended. How long before we have that happening here? I don't think it'll take long. Because I think what you end up having is, as soon as the Green New Deal, which is not just some pie-in-the-sky deal, it's actually a piece of legislation. They continue to push it all the time. If we allow this to go on, if we allow this to happen in our country, we'll just be like South Africa. we will become an S-hole country. Mark my words. Let's get a couple of taxpayer relief shots. The first one comes to us. By the way, let me explain again, because there are new people listening to the podcast every single day, and I really appreciate that. But when you hear taxpayer relief shot, I think perhaps it probably deserves a little bit of an explanation. What we do with the taxpayer relief shot is we find, actually, I don't find stories. Agent Jed A., one of the listeners of the podcast, finds these stories and sends them to me virtually every single day. We rarely run out of taxpayer relief shots. And the whole purpose behind these stories is to celebrate not the death of a thug who's trying to break into somebody's home or try to rob a convenience store or trying to rape somebody's daughter or trying to commit some other crime. What we are celebrating is the fact that in this country, kind of like Brazil's finally recognizing that they need to do, we celebrate that there is this natural right, that there is a God-given right of self-defense. And so every time that you have an anti-gun story, oh my gosh, there's been a shooting somewhere, there's been a mass shooting, which I'm coming to think is when somebody tells me there's been a mass shooting, that tells me that one individual's been shot. And look, I don't think every shooting is a tragedy. Even the shooting of a thug is a tragedy. But when you start trying to tell everybody that everything is a mass shooting, you start to desensitize people to it. You also begin to desensitize people to the idea that they have a right to defend themselves, and instead they have a knee-jerk reaction that says what we ought to do is try to take everybody's guns away. When I talked earlier about how the speed of the drive toward an authoritarian society has just exponentially increased, the progressives have come out of the closet. It used to be that they would say, I'm a staunch believer in the Second Amendment. Why, I go hunting myself, as if those two are correlated, which they are not. They've gone from that to just out and out advocating banning the possession of firearms by individuals in this country. Now, they're going to have to get around the Second Amendment, and they're trying to do that in different ways. They're trying to do that by making it financially difficult for gun manufacturers. They're trying to take away their protection from liability for manufacturing a completely legal product. Just like a car's a legal product, but a car can become a lethal weapon just like a gun. So what we do in the taxpayer relief shot is we celebrate the fact that we still have the right of self-defense. And I use that as an antidote against everyone who says that every time that somebody's shot with a gun, that's another reason why we ought to take away guns. Because in these stories, if you put yourself in the place of the good guy, but without a gun, it may make you rethink taking everybody else's guns away. The first taxpayer relief shot, and by the way, I call them taxpayer relief shots because by the fact that a criminal breaking into someone's home, as the example in St. Petersburg will show you in just a second, even though we have embedded costs of police departments and the judicial system, by the fact that a homeowner takes out someone who is breaking into his home to either steal his property or to kill him or to rape his wife or do anything else, we have saved the taxpayers the cost of incarceration, the cost of a trial, the cost of all of those things. Thus, taxpayer relief shots. St. Petersburg, Florida, as reported by Fox 13 down there. A St. Petersburg homeowner opened fire on an intruder, the Popo says, injuring the suspect. According to St. Petersburg police, two masked and armed men entered the home just before midnight Tuesday. They said the victim shot at the suspects and they fled. One of the suspects was shot multiple times, according to the Popo, and was found in the middle of the roadway when officers arrived. He was identified as 26-year-old Randy Stanley Jr. The second suspect was not located as of Wednesday morning. The first suspect was transported to Bayfront Hospital in critical condition. He faces charges of home invasion, robbery, and felon in possession of a firearm. Wait a minute, felon in possession of felons can't possess firearms. Oh, I guess this is proof that felons will get guns regardless of what we do. Baytown, Texas is our next one, down by Houston.
The family of that woman killed by a Baytown officer yesterday says she was schizophrenic, and they think the officer should have handled the situation differently. It all began outside 44-year-old Pamela Turner's apartment complex late Monday night. Police say that officer was in the area and he was familiar with Turner. He knew she had 2 outstanding warrants and he was trying to arrest her. Police say Turner struggled, grabbed the officer's taser and tased him. Then he grabbed his gun and shot her. But her family now says the officer didn't need to kill her.
Now I want to pause for a second. You're about to hear from a family member. I don't know who it is. You've heard what happened. She's wanted on felony warrants. They approach. They tase. She gets the taser. Who knows at that point? I think any rational person, you've tased someone, they have gotten the taser away from you, you don't know whether they have a gun or not, and they start attacking you. I think any reasonable person would find that in a case like that, shooting someone to protect your own life against that of the felon who has now put your life in danger, that would be a reasonable thing for cops to do. And I get that family members, when they've lost someone, even if they are people who are wanted on felony warrants, still don't think their loved ones should have died.
When he had her on the ground, he could have easily arrested her. Well, gave her a chance to see the judge. Anything but take her life.
Oh. When he had her on the ground, he could have done something. What? They're fighting each other. I don't know whether he has a service weapon out of his holster or not. I'm going to assume that he does, since he's tased the woman. He's now engaged in a physical struggle. What's he supposed to do? Jump up, pull away from her, which, if she had a gun, gives her the opportunity to grab the gun, shoot the officer. The decision to protect your own life, whether it's in your own home or in a situation like this cop, those decisions are made in milliseconds. And I can guarantee you that if I took that young lady who's all upset about the loss of her loved one and put her in the same situation, but someone was potentially threatening her life, she would have done the same thing as the cop.
Well, the officer is an 11-year veteran with Baytown Police Department and is now on paid administrative leave. And the department is conducting its own investigation. And once it's complete, they will determine whether to file charges.
In the ongoing battle between Democrats and Republicans about the Mueller report and the finding of no obstruction and no collusion, as I've said before, the Attorney General of the United States, Bill Barr, has announced publicly the assignment of a U.S. attorney from Connecticut who has a fantastic track record of investigating wrongdoing by government officials. He's announced that investigation. And the Democrats, the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, the House Majority Leader, almost every single presidential candidate on the Democrat side, have all come out just apoplectic about this ongoing investigation. Now, the investigation, some speculate, has been going on for several months, and that it ties into the investigation being conducted by the Department of Justice Inspector General Michael Horowitz. I think that is probably true, and I think that is probably a reasonable conjecture to make. But what I find fascinating is this attempt by both Democrats, the Speaker, the Majority Leader, I think every single person running for the Democrat nomination, have come out and just blasted the Attorney General for investigating the origins of the Mueller probe. Why would you object? What are you trying to hide? Shouldn't we want to, if after all of these initial allegations, if you think back to 2016 and just the screaming at the top of their lungs about potential Russian collusion, everybody thought, we've got to investigate. So the investigation was conducted. There was no collusion found. There was no obstruction of justice found. Wouldn't a rational person want to know, okay, so then how did we get to that point? Don't you want to understand how we got to that point? So CNN's Anderson Cooper had on Jeffery Toobin, CNN legal analyst. I don't agree much with what Toobin ever says. His legal analysis usually flies in the face of whatever I learned in law school. And I passed law school, and I passed the bar exam too, so I think I'm as qualified as Jeffery Toobin to speak on these issues. But he was asked by Anderson Cooper, don't you find something fishy in the fact that we're now conducting an investigation, or that the Attorney General has assigned this prosecutor to find out how this whole thing started? Toobin replies,
think about the chilling message it sends to career, non-political people in the FBI, in the Justice Department.
Stop. Chilling? How many times have you heard people say, well, I have nothing to hide, so I've got nothing to worry about? Now, I've always thought that was a stupid thing to say, because a overzealous prosecutor can find anything. I think if Bob Mueller, in fact, Bob Mueller did find some stuff, totally unrelated to Russia, totally unrelated to collusion, totally unrelated to obstruction of justice, but he found other crimes. He found that Paul Manafort had committed some financial crimes, in no way related to Russia and in no way related to any sort of obstruction of justice by Donald Trump. Proof positive that an overzealous prosecutor, or a prosecutor with unlimited funds and unlimited time, can find anybody chargeable with a crime. So when Toobin says that there is a chilling effect on career employees in law enforcement, the FBI and Department of Justice, I think he's nuts. Chilling effect? This is the same as a good cop saying, yeah, I don't want to report the bad cop. And I know the bad cop is giving us a bad name, and the bad cop is causing me problems, and the bad cop is causing the department problems, but I just want to sweep that under the rug because I don't want to stir anything up. No. And in fact, as I've always said, good cops want bad cops exposed, because bad cops make it hard for good cops to do their job, and it makes it even more difficult for good cops to keep the public trust. So anytime that there is a hint of malfeasance or incompetence or criminality, it should be investigated. It doesn't have a chilling effect, unless, of course, you're guilty. And then it scares the bejesus out of you.
What it means is, if you defy the president's wishes, his political appointees, like the Attorney General, they won't initiate one investigation. They won't initiate 2, 3 investigations of you for doing your job. It's a really chilling message.
If you're doing your job, you ought to just stand up with your shoulders back and your head high, and you ought to walk into that investigator's office. You ought to walk into that U.S. Attorney's office and say, I understand you're investigating me. Here I am. Have at it. Unless, of course, you have something to hide. You're not going to do that.
This is a completely unnecessary investigation by the Connecticut U.S. Attorney. It's completely duplicative of the Inspector General's investigation.
No, whoa. The U.S. Attorney was appointed because the U.S. Attorney has prosecutorial discretion. the U.S. attorney that was appointed can make a recommendation that if wrongdoing is found, that certain people be prosecuted. The Inspector General, whose investigation has been ongoing, has no prosecutorial authority. The only thing the Inspector General can do is make a recommendation to the Attorney General, hey, here's my report, I found some wrongdoing, do with it what you want. In this case, the U.S. attorney, if he finds wrongdoing, which he may or may not, let's let the investigation run its course, but if this U.S. attorney finds wrongdoing, he can file charges.
And it's just a way of harassing people who have done their jobs, but not to the satisfaction of the President of the United States.
The President of the United States is not the one that appointed this U.S. attorney to conduct this investigation. That was done by the Attorney General. And the best I can tell from all the news reports, I don't think that was something that Bill Barr sat down and talked to President Trump about. Prove me wrong. I may be wrong. But that's the decision by the Attorney General. But the other point I wanted to make with that clip from Jeffery Toobin is this. There is, between the Democrats themselves and their useful idiots in the media, this attempt to create a narrative that says the Mueller report came out, they refused to release the unredacted report, which legally they cannot do, and now they're going to investigate the origins of the investigation. They are just fishing. Or they are, in the words of Jeffery Toobin, they are having a chilling effect on any other investigations or whatever crimes might be investigated by career people at the Justice Department or the FBI. That's having a chilling effect on those people. What a load of crap. Truly a load of BS. Investigations occur all the time. If people continue to scream this loudly about someone just trying to find out the origins of how did we get to that point in 2016 where the Obama administration had FISA warrants to spy on the Trump campaign, a party and a campaign of the opposition party, I think that's a reasonable thing to investigate. And the louder they scream, the more it makes me think, yeah, something fishy's going on. Speaking of fishy, I don't know why everything cool happens in Florida. So what's the latest one? Turns out that a man is being accused of slapping his girlfriend with a cheeseburger. I had a lunch with some friends yesterday. I had a cheeseburger. I never thought about bringing one home, an extra one home, so I could slap Tamara with it. I mean, good grief. Well, she was sleeping. Because, he wanted to wake her up with the smell of some food. I don't know. Martin County Sheriff's Office posted the man's mugshot on Facebook, stating that 30-year-old Kyle Jamison Jones wanted it his way. Okay, Sheriff, your attempt at humor, I'll give you a C+. But when things didn't fold out the way he wanted to, they quickly went south, and by south, they totally meant he ended up in jail. According to the deputies, after the Florida man slapped her with a burger, she immediately woke up. Do you ever watch these movies or anything on television where someone's asleep in a bedroom, a wife or a girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, and the suspicious husband, wife, girlfriend, or boyfriend walks into the bedroom? They open the side drawer. They move around. They're looking for stuff. They're trying to find out whether somebody's cheating or not cheating. And that other person just sleeps right through it. I never understood that. Hell's bells, my dog scratches and it wakes me up. According to the deputies, after the Florida man slapped her with the burger, she immediately woke up. The girlfriend told authorities that despite her being awake, he continued to hit her with the delicious burger. But then it quickly became violent. Started pulling her hair and kicked her down the stairs. People, they're losers everywhere. She called 911, and when deputies arrived, they found the girlfriend covered in food particles, which it must have been kind of a strange thing to see, but Well, it's Florida, where people call 911 because they don't have chicken nuggets or the McChicken nuggets or whatever, or they're out of whatever the special is that day. Jones has been charged with battery. Probably will not go to a Burger King anytime soon, or for that matter, probably won't get back together with his girlfriend. The 30-year-old, going on 20, reportedly only admitted to a verbal dispute, refusing to say anything about becoming physical with a woman. I wonder if this, remember yesterday we talked about hate crimes? So here, he's been charged with a battery. But he obviously really hated her. Because one, he wasted her perfectly good cheeseburger. I assume it was a good cheeseburger. So there must have been hate in his heart. Why isn't he charged with battery with hate? Remember I can't remember exactly the details, but there was the story about the husband that slapped his wife with a Taco Bell burrito and got arrested. I don't know. I never cease to be amazed by the stupidity that goes on in the world. At least it gives us something to laugh about in light of all of the other news, right? Right. Hey, thanks for listening to this edition of Michael Brown Unplugged. As always, I appreciate you listening. I ask you once again if you would share the podcast with your friends, your neighbors, your family, your enemies, whoever you think might enjoy or whoever might hate the podcast. Send it to them. Irritate them. Make them mad. And then I ask you to do a favor. Go to my website, michaelbrowntoday.com, michaelbrowntoday.com, and there you'll see over there in the corner where you can download or stream the podcast on Spreaker. We're also on Spotify, TuneIn, Stitcher, and I forget what else. And we've made application to iTunes, so we should be on iTunes pretty soon. Still waiting to hear about iHeart, dragging their feet. I'll see if I can't light a fire under somebody to get on the iHeart app. And then at michaelbrowntoday.com, you'll see across the bottom all of the social media icons. On the Facebook page, if you go like the Facebook page, we also have a discussion group which you can ask to join. And if you're not a troll or you're not some guy that slaps his girlfriend with a cheeseburger, we'll let you into that discussion group. You can follow me on Twitter. You can subscribe to the YouTube page, which we always post the podcast on the YouTube page. And you can follow me on Instagram. So go to michaelbrowntoday.com, all the social media icons, click those and follow me, and then be sure and stream the podcast, share it with your friends, and most of all, share it with your enemies, just to irritate them. Because it's always good to irritate your enemies, right? I know we're supposed to love our enemies, but sometimes it's fun to irritate them. So enjoy this podcast, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow.